Cecily Haverleigh had learned early that a mind, however bright, could be disciplined by the rules of polite society as surely as any body. In London, the season demanded proper smiles and punctual visits. In the country, it demanded proper silence. Her family possessed an entailed estate that sounded steadier than it felt. Each year, the income grew narrower, the taxes heavier, and the cheerful assurances of relatives became thinner with every passing month. Still, Cecily had agency. She used it the way a needle used its point, carefully, precisely, and never without intention. At 24, she was neither debutante nor faded ornament. She had made her own position by attending the right calls without overreaching, by speaking when invited, and by withholding the rest as if it were a secret currency. She was not the sort of woman who begged for attention. She was the sort who ensured that attention arrived on its own, tethered to respect. Yet she carried a private education no chaperone would ever credit. She knew how estates were bargained, how debts were disguised as benevolence, and how a rumor could be crafted with the same ease as a calling card. Her trouble began at the rival estate's edge, at Wardenmere House, belonging to the Varon family, where Cecily had been invited under the pretense of a charitable supper. Lady Marceline Varon, widow to a man who had died with debts that did not die with him, hosted with a particular elegance, always generous in public, always exacting in private. Lady Marceline had once described Cecily as a sensible creature with too much reflection, as though it were both compliment and warning. Cecily had smiled then, and she smiled still. That afternoon, the Varons' gardens offered a different kind of persuasion than any drawing room. The path to the Glasshouse led behind clipped hedges, where the air softened, and where even the most nosy footman would think twice before wandering without purpose. Cecily had gone there with her companion only until she could plausibly be left. She had intended to retrieve a ribbon, one she had misplaced, she told herself, for Cecily Haverleigh never admitted necessity until she could disguise it as convenience. The Glasshouse stood warmed by the sun and perfumed by wet earth. The panes caught the light as if the building itself were blushing. Within, there were rows of delicate plants, and on the work table a half-finished arrangement of cut blooms. Cecily would have been content to leave at once, but the garden had a way of turning chance into fate. The Duke of Haverleigh arrived without announcement. He came as the sort of man who was accustomed to doors opening because his name lived behind them. Cecily had seen him at least once in London. His height and his restraint had been noted immediately by women who pretended not to notice. The season treated him like a storm it could admire from a balcony. Men spoke of him in quieter tones, because men often feared what they could not control. But fear was not the emotion Cecily felt when he stepped into the Glasshouse. It was something colder and more humiliating: recognition. She had been told of him as a rumor first, an heir with an entailed property chain tangled in scandal, an important patron of certain funds, a man with opinions sharp enough to cut without raising his voice. She had been told he liked honest conversation, yet kept honest conversation trapped behind etiquette like a caged bird. Now, in the Glasshouse, he held himself with an intensity that suggested he carried more than his own discomfort. His brows drew slightly, as if he were reading a problem only he could see. The light, catching the scar along his left brow, made him look as though he had been wounded by something other than war, something personal. Cecily had not planned to meet him. She had planned to gather her ribbon and go. She had planned, above all, to preserve her dignity. Instead, the Duke of Haverleigh moved toward the work table, reached for a small knife used for trimming stems, and paused when he realized Cecily stood there. He regarded her with a directness that would have been rude in any other man. In him it was worse, because it felt like truth. "Miss Haverleigh," he said. Her name seemed to settle between them like a weight. She should have curtsied immediately. She did not. Cecily stepped back the barest distance, positioning herself so that the plants behind her created a screen of leaves and color. She offered him a calm smile, as though she had been arranged there for his convenience. "You appear," she replied, "to have chosen a room where no proper calling should occur." The Duke's mouth tightened at the edges. His flaw, she realized at once, was impatience disguised as composure. He was accustomed to rooms yielding. He did not like rooms that demanded restraint. "I chose it because the garden does not pretend," he said. "In London, everyone speaks as if they are paid to be misunderstood." Cecily's fingers tightened around the ribbon spool she had not truly come for. It was absurd. She wanted to accuse him of arrogance, and yet her mind kept returning to one fact. He knew her. "Then you must have suffered," she said, and made the tone light, the way one might make a remark about weather. His eyes flicked to her hand, then to her face. "I have suffered," he said simply, "but not from speech." There it was, a confession without emotion, a man who believed his own control could replace feelings. Cecily forced herself not to look away. She could not afford to appear affected. The Glasshouse air held heat and damp. It clung to her dress. She felt the absurd temptation to ask why he was there at all. Instead, she asked the only question propriety permitted. "Have you been invited?" The Duke's expression shifted into something harder. He looked, briefly, like a man cornered by his own reputation. "Lady Marceline Varon is kind enough," he said. "I came to speak with her, and I discovered I was not the only one who had chosen the quiet corner of her domain." Cecily's cheeks warmed. The remark suggested more than it stated. He had seen her there. Perhaps he had seen her arrive. Perhaps he had heard something. A sound outside, footsteps muffled by soil and leaves, made them both still. Cecily's heart did not race wildly. It steadied, as it always did when the world grew dangerous. She understood that panic was a luxury. A shadow moved at the Glasshouse door. A servant entered, then hesitated, blinking at the sight of them in the same space. "My lord," the servant began, and then corrected with the frantic skill of one who feared being wrong. "Lady Marceline bids—" The Duke cut the servant off with a glance. "Bid her send no one here," he said. "We will not be long." The servant bowed and fled. Cecily's mind raced through possibilities. She was in a room that could be interpreted a dozen ways by a gossip with a taste for ruin. She had always prided herself on being careful, and now she had been caught in the only way society truly punishes. Not with punishment, but with story. The Duke moved closer, lowering his voice without truly whispering. "Miss Harrowdean," he said, "do you know why I have come?" "I imagine," Cecily replied, "it is not etiquette." His eyes sharpened. "It is business, but I am not here to negotiate a bargain with you." Cecily's restraint, her careful silence, suddenly felt like a shield too thin. "Then what?" she asked. The Duke's jaw flexed. His confession came out like a flaw revealing itself. "Because I have been told," he said, "that you are the rightful manager of an arrangement which, if it were handled improperly, would leave your estate at the mercy of men who do not deserve it." Cecily almost laughed, but it would have been the wrong kind of sound, one too open, one too honest. She had never told him about any arrangement. "Who told you?" she asked. His eyes flicked away, as though he hated the answer even before he spoke it. "Lady Marceline," he said. "She insists you have been assisting her in accounting. She insists you are in her service." Cecily's fingers went cold. Lady Marceline could say anything. Lady Marceline could turn any act of intelligence into a stain. "She has a talent," Cecily said carefully, "for making assistance sound like captivity." The Duke's expression softened for the briefest moment. Not sympathy exactly, something like recognition that honesty existed between them. And then his impatience returned. "I did not come to be entertained by your refinement," he said. "I came because I caught sight of your calling cards at a solicitor's desk." Cecily blinked once. The detail was precise. It was also humiliating. She understood now why Lady Marceline had positioned the meeting in such a place. The garden was romantic in paintings, but in real life it was dangerous. If the wrong people entered the Glasshouse at the right moment, the story would write itself. She had agency, but not immunity. "Perhaps you are mistaken," she said. The Duke's gaze held her like a hand around a delicate throat. "I am not," he replied. "I also heard the rumors about your father's debts he keeps hidden behind cheerful promises." Cecily stiffened at once. Family betrayal was always treated as if it were a personal failing rather than a circumstance others exploited. "You should not speak," she said, voice controlled, "of what you do not understand." The Duke's eyes flashed, anger at being contradicted, at being forced into feeling. It was his genuine flaw. He could be so sure he was right that he forgot the dignity of those he corrected. "I understand enough," he said. "I understand you are too clever to be merely used. And I understand this. Lady Marceline intends to have you compromised so that the only path left to you will be dependence." Cecily felt the ache of it, slow and quiet, like a bruise developing under skin. He believed he was protecting her. It was almost touching. Almost. "What would you have me do?" she asked. She made it a question of agency, not of acceptance. His gaze dropped to her ribbon spool. He stepped back slightly, giving her the space propriety required, while still refusing to grant her full comfort. "I would have you leave Wardenmere House," he said. "Now." Cecily did not move. "And if I do," she replied, "the whispers will simply find a new corner." A silence stretched between them, tense as a drawn bowstring. The Duke's voice lowered again. "Then we must choose the version of events society will believe." Cecily studied him. He looked handsome, but the scar and the controlled severity made him seem unfinished, like a portrait that refused to be varnished. She recognized the kind of man who could do anything to prevent humiliation, except admit he might be wrong. "Propose," she said at last. His eyes widened, as if she had offered him a foreign instrument. "Pardon?" Cecily's expression stayed composed. Restraint was her power, and she would not squander it on a plea. "If you are determined to rescue me," she said, "then do it properly. If society thinks I have been alone with a man in a glasshouse, it will not ask for your reasons. It will not ask for mine. It will demand a solution." His mouth tightened. He was not a man accustomed to being directed. "And what solution do you propose?" he asked. Cecily looked at him fully now. "A proposal," she repeated, precise as a calling card. "A marriage. A public announcement. Something that makes the story tidy." The Duke stared at her as if she were both impossible and inevitable. Then, with a bitter edge, he said, "You would accept such a bargain because you are being threatened?" Cecily's voice never rose. "No," she replied. "I would accept because I understand the rules better than those who would harm me. Entailed estates can be preserved by contracts. Reputations can be preserved by timing. If you mean to protect me, you must do it with boldness." Boldness was not his habit. It was hers. Outside, footsteps again. A moment later, the door eased open and Lady Marceline herself stepped into the Glasshouse. She moved with a practiced serenity, dressed in colors that suggested both mourning and wealth. Her smile was the sort that never reached her eyes. Her gaze landed on Cecily first, then slid to the Duke of Haverleigh. "My lord," Lady Marceline said pleasantly, "I had not expected to find you where the light is so flattering." Cecily felt the trap tighten. Lady Marceline had arrived as if she were the author of the scene. The Duke straightened at once, his impatience flaring in his posture even when his face stayed controlled. "Lady Marceline," he said, "you sent a servant." "Oh, I merely wished to confirm," Lady Marceline replied. "Miss Harrowdean has been so diligent with your concerns. I thought it best that I check you were—" Her smile widened by a fraction. "Not in need of instruction." Cecily heard the insult wrapped in silk. She heard, too, that Lady Marceline's words were a weapon aimed at Cecily's agency. If Cecily could be painted as dependent, she could be moved like a piece on a board. The Duke's gaze sharpened. "She is not in need of instruction," he said. Lady Marceline tilted her head. "Then perhaps you will explain," she purred, "why a woman alone with you in a private glasshouse has become a subject of your protection." Cecily realized then that she would not be allowed to escape with dignity unless she acted. She could curtsy and look innocent, but innocence would be interpreted as guilt by anyone hungry for story. So Cecily chose something else. She turned her head slightly toward the Duke, as if consulting him, and with a slow, deliberate breath, she composed her expression into polite neutrality. "My lord," she said evenly, "Lady Marceline has been kind enough to inform you of my supposed place in her household." Lady Marceline's smile flickered. Cecily continued, careful and unyielding. "It appears you have believed her." The Duke's eyes stayed on Lady Marceline, his jaw tightening again. Cecily shifted her gaze to him and allowed a small tremor of feeling only she could control. "I do not belong to her," she said. "I belong to my own conscience." Lady Marceline's expression cooled. "Conscience does not keep a woman safe in society," she said. The Duke spoke then, and his voice carried the weight of a man who meant to win without understanding what winning would cost. "Society will find her safe," he said, "because I intend to marry her." The words landed like a struck bell. Lady Marceline's composure held for a heartbeat and then, just enough, cracked. She recovered quickly, of course, because she was practiced. "How sudden," she said, "and how convenient." Cecily did not look at Lady Marceline. She looked at the Duke, and her restraint became a deliberate offering. She did not gasp. She did not smile. She did not protest. She only curtsied. It was small, proper, and devastating. Her agency was in what she refused to add. The Duke blinked at the curtsy, as if he had expected gratitude or tears. Instead, he found her composed. Cecily's silence forced him to fill the space with what he had not prepared. He cleared his throat. "We will inform the household," he said. Lady Marceline's eyes flashed, but her voice stayed smooth. "Of course, my lord. Society will be delighted." Cecily understood then the real obstacle. Lady Marceline did not fear scandal. She feared losing control over Cecily's future. A marriage could be a chain, but it could also be a lock on a door. Cecily meant to choose which. She looked at Lady Marceline once, directly. "Lady Marceline," she said, "you will find my departure from Wardenmere House conducted with all propriety." Lady Marceline's smile returned, sharper now. "How considerate." The Duke escorted Cecily out of the Glasshouse. The garden outside felt too bright, too observed. Servants waited at distances that allowed them to pretend not to see. Cecily kept her posture straight, her eyes lowered at the precise angle that denied prying while still acknowledging presence. As they walked, the Duke spoke in fragments. "You should not have agreed," he said. Cecily's gaze remained forward. "I did not agree," she replied. "I proposed a solution. You chose to take it." His expression twisted. "I did not take it lightly." "Then be wise," she said. A pause. "Wise?" he repeated, as if the word were new. Cecily finally looked at him. In his eyes she saw two things, a desire that did not know how to behave and a pride that did not know how to yield. "Be wise enough," she said quietly, "to remember that society believes what it expects. If you marry me to quiet a rumor, it will still chew at you. If you marry me because you see me, the rumor will starve." The Duke stared, caught by the honesty disguised as instruction. "Is that what you want?" he asked. Cecily's restraint returned like a curtain. "It is what I require," she corrected. They reached a covered terrace where the air carried the scent of roses and a distant hint of river fog. A carriage waited, drawn by horses whose harness gleamed. "The household will be told," the Duke said, "this evening, publicly." Cecily nodded once. "Good," she replied. "Then I may also be told publicly." He frowned. "Told?" Cecily lifted her chin. "Lady Marceline accused me in front of you," she said. "I will not allow my silence to become her proof." His throat tightened. He was beginning to understand. Cecily was not only a woman being rescued, she was a mind reshaping the narrative. "Then we will have the solicitor come," he said. Cecily smiled faintly, almost imperceptibly. "You see," she replied. "You already know how to fight without a sword." That evening, Wardenmere House became a stage, the drawing room filled with voices that pretended to be concerned. Lady Marceline's friends arrived, with their expressions poised to receive news, each one ready to decide whether it was scandal or romance. When the Duke of Haverleigh announced his intention, carefully framed, not too extravagant but undeniably public, there was a rush of whispered delight. Women blinked rapidly, men leaned closer, their curiosity sharpening their manners. Cecily stood beside the Duke, not pressed into submissive angles, but placed where she could be seen clearly. That, too, was a form of agency, to refuse to be hidden. Lady Marceline remained at the periphery with an expression that suggested grief. She lamented politely. She asked if Cecily was at ease. She spoke as though she were already mournfully parting from a daughter she had not possessed. The household solicitor arrived 2 days later. In a private chamber, he laid papers out with the careful gravity of a man who understood that ink could destroy. Cecily listened as he read aloud the terms of a neglected arrangement tied to her entailed estate. Her father had, years ago, made promises in writing to settle debts. He had also concealed a portion of the estate's management authority behind a stipulation that could be triggered by circumstances, bankruptcy of a relative, or disavowal by certain trustees. Lady Marceline, it emerged, had not invented the accusation. She had only timed its revelation. The solicitor's words were dry. Cecily's response was not. "I will not accept my father's deception," she said, and made her voice gentle enough that it sounded like sorrow rather than anger. "But I will accept responsibility for the remedy." The Duke of Haverleigh sat across from her, his hands clasped as if he were restraining himself from reaching for the papers too early. He looked, for once, uncertain. "You intend to fix it yourself?" he asked. Cecily met his gaze. "I intend to do what you cannot," she replied. "I intend to know my own figures." He gave a short laugh without humor. "I know figures." Cecily tilted her head. "Then why do you speak as if the solution is always elsewhere?" He stared at her, caught. The flaw again, his impatience with complexity. Later, when Cecily was alone and the solicitor had left, Lady Marceline visited her under pretense of propriety. The widow's smile was too controlled. "My dear," Lady Marceline said, "society requires reassurance. A woman's heart must be guided. You are too intelligent. It will make you difficult to please." Cecily's eyes remained steady. She had learned from this woman's kind of cruelty. Do not offer an emotion she can weaponize. "You invited me," Cecily replied. Lady Marceline's brows rose. "I invited you to be useful to my plans. I thought it flattering that you might be seen," Cecily finished, voice calm. "Yet you did not invite me to be safe." A pause. Lady Marceline leaned closer. "Safety," she said, "is what marriage provides. The Duke will take you into his orbit. You will be sheltered." Cecily considered the words. She could hear the trap in them. "And if he regrets it?" Cecily asked. Lady Marceline's smile thinned. "Men rarely regret what society applauds." Cecily's expression did not change. Inside, something long quiet woke into urgency. She had been taught to accept that love could be delayed, but not demanded. Now, she demanded. "I will not be sheltered from the truth," Cecily said. "If he regrets it, he will do it openly. And if society applauds, I will make certain it applauds rightly." Lady Marceline's gaze flickered, as if she had expected gratitude. For the first time, the widow's control looked strained. "You are bold," she said. Cecily's response was soft. "I am prepared." After her departure from Wardenmere, London offered no reprieve. The season had already begun to stir with its familiar hunger. Balls, morning calls, and calling cards that arrived with messages hidden in neat script. Cecily's engagement, forced by scandal but shaped by her own negotiation, was announced before it could be twisted further. The public understood it as romance because public minds preferred simple stories. The ton delighted in the notion that the Duke's severity had been softened by a woman of wit. Cecily accepted the applause without surrendering her skepticism. The Duke of Haverleigh, however, struggled with a different kind of discomfort. His flaw, his refusal to yield, had been tested by the fact of her restraint. He did not know what to do with a woman who did not collapse into gratitude. Their days were filled with calls. Their nights were filled with the sort of privacy that society pretended not to notice. A chaperone sat within sight as if to keep propriety stitched to skin. Yet there were moments when Cecily and the Duke spoke without the rehearsed stiffness of courtship. In one such moment, in a quiet library at his townhouse, Cecily found him staring at a letter he had not yet opened. "What is it?" she asked. His eyes snapped to her. "A warning," he replied. Cecily approached carefully, as though her footsteps could alter the paper's mood. "From Lady Marceline?" she asked. He hesitated. "From a trustee," he said. "She is not the only one who uses ink." Cecily's mind moved quickly. Trustees controlled entailed arrangements. Trustees, like widows and fortune hunters, could be bought. "Then open it," she said. The Duke's jaw tightened again. He did not like being ordered. Cecily did not insist. She only set her gaze on him until his pride yielded a fraction. He unfolded the letter and read. His face tightened in a way Cecily recognized from the Glasshouse, the moment a plan turns in the wrong direction. "What does it say?" Cecily asked. "It says," he replied, voice clipped, "that certain documents were revised without my knowledge. Certain obligations are being pushed toward your estate again." Cecily's eyes narrowed. "Which means the compromise was not merely a rumor," she said. "It was a test." He looked at her, and this time there was something in his gaze beyond irritation. There was respect, raw and reluctant. "You were right," he said. Cecily's heart ached. It was one thing to be right. It was another to have him see it. "Why now?" she asked. "Why propose only after you discovered Lady Marceline meant to trap me?" He swallowed. "Because I realized too late," he admitted. "I am impatient. I assumed I could fix everything with presence." Cecily stared, surprised by the honesty. His flaws, though, were not an absence of character. They were a form of blindness. "And if you had been wrong?" she asked. He looked away. "Then you would have been ruined," he said. Cecily reached for the letter and set it aside carefully, as though the paper required gentleness too. "Then you will learn," she replied softly, "that presence is not the same as understanding." A silence followed. It was full of propriety and unspoken desire. They kept moving toward the marriage without admitting how much the other changed them. The Duke softened slowly, not in sentiment but in attention. Cecily began to let him in, but only in the ways she could control. The next major obstacle arrived at Almack's. The Duke of Haverleigh was scheduled to attend as a matter of duty. His engagement made him a public symbol. Cecily had agreed to accompany him, though she understood the risk. When society wished to test a woman, it did so by watching her posture, her smile, and her willingness to suffer without complaint. Lady Marceline, too, attended, gliding into the room with the calm of someone certain the outcome would serve her. At Almack's, Cecily did not allow herself to look at Lady Marceline for long. She studied the room instead. She counted the women who stared too quickly. She watched the couples who had arrived with competing expressions of celebration. She noted the calling cards exchanged by footmen in the antechamber. Her intelligence became her anchor. The Duke of Haverleigh, however, could not ignore the social battlefield. His flaws made him react. He moved too fast toward a group of men when the talk began to tilt toward speculation. Cecily felt it happen. She felt it before she heard it. A woman near the doorway smiled too sweetly and said, loud enough for a few ears to catch, "How clever of the Duke to choose a companion with connections." Another voice answered, lower but sharp, "They say she was kept at Wardenmere like a tool." Cecily's spine tightened, but she did not turn her head fully. She refused to give them the satisfaction of a visible wound. The Duke heard it. She saw him register it, and then saw his pride flare. He would have confronted them. He wanted to win. Cecily stepped in first. She curtsied, just once, toward the women. It was polite in the way a blade is polite, careful, poised, and final. "Ladies," she said, voice calm enough to be mistaken for harmlessness, "I believe you will find my character more accurate than your curiosity." Her restraint was her power. She did not add bitterness. She did not explain. She simply ended the conversation. The women blinked, unsure how to respond to a woman who refused to be provoked into speech. The whispers resumed anyway, because whispers did not need permission. But the men who had been enjoying speculation now had doubts, because Cecily had made confrontation unnecessary. She had redirected the room's attention to her dignity rather than her alleged scandal. The Duke of Haverleigh watched her from the edge of the dance floor. His gaze held her with a kind of aching intensity. He could not decide whether to admire or to fear what she did so easily. Later that night, when the music softened for a pause between dances, Cecily found him beside a window overlooking the streetlights. "You should not have spoken," he said. Cecily turned her head slowly. "I did not speak to fight," she replied. "I spoke to be seen." He rubbed his brow, as if his scar itched. "Society will never stop," he muttered. Cecily studied him. "Society does stop," she said. "It stops when you stop feeding it with your anger." His mouth tightened. "And if I cannot stop?" Cecily's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "Then you must learn to direct your passion," she said, "not at the rumor, at the woman it threatens." His eyes widened at that. He looked at her as though he were seeing her for the first time, without the distortions of his pride. "What do you threaten me with?" he asked. Cecily's voice lowered. "Truth," she replied. He swallowed again. "Then tell me," he said. Cecily realized then what he meant. He wanted her to explain the scandal, the arrangement, the trap. He wanted her to reassure him with words. She could have done so. She could have offered a tidy narrative and ended his discomfort. Instead, she curtsied, and once again her restraint did the work her speech might have ruined. In the morning, the Duke received a letter from Lady Marceline with an invitation to a country house party at Varon Hall under the pretense of reconciliation. It invited Cecily as well. Cecily read it and handed it to him without commentary. He stared at it, recognizing the manipulation. "She wants us together," he said. Cecily nodded. "She wants society to witness your decision," she replied. "And she wants to see whether I appear grateful." "And if we refuse?" he asked. Cecily smiled faintly. "Then she will insist I refused because I knew myself dishonored." He looked at her sharply. "Then we go," he said. Cecily's eyes met his. "But we go prepared," she replied. The country house party at Varon Hall became a prolonged test of propriety. A rival estate's gardens, once merely picturesque, now felt like a battleground. Cecily kept her movements measured, her speech minimal, her smile careful enough to be mistaken for contentment. The Duke tried to behave impeccably, but his flaw, impatience, continued to surface when Lady Marceline's subtle barbs landed. During a dinner beneath chandeliers, Lady Marceline made a remark about entailed estates. She spoke as if she were offering advice. "Women with estates should avoid alliances," Lady Marceline said. "They distract from the real duties of a wife." Cecily paused with her fork mid-air, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. The Duke of Haverleigh could have snapped. He did not. His control held for the sake of the table. Cecily set her fork down slowly, calmly. "I agree," she said. "Wives have duties." Lady Marceline smiled, sensing victory. Cecily continued, with soft precision. "And the first duty of a wife," she said, "is to preserve the truth, even when it is inconvenient to those who benefit from convenience." The room became still. Lady Marceline's smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. After dinner, the drawing rooms filled with women's laughter that sounded like practiced music. Cecily did not join long. Instead, she walked through the corridor with a maid carrying her wrap, moving with quiet purpose. She met the Duke by the garden's gate. "Why are you here?" he asked. Cecily looked at him. "Because she expects me to be alone," she replied, "and because I am not." His eyes narrowed. "Then who is with you?" Cecily glanced at the maid, then at the Duke. "You," she said. The Duke's expression shifted, surprise, then discomfort. He understood immediately that she meant to avoid being trapped again. She had set her plan to deny Lady Marceline the compromise she craved. Lady Marceline, too, understood. She had arranged the party so that every corridor and garden path offered a possibility for scandal. Later that evening, as the moon rose pale over the clipped hedges, the Duke escorted Cecily into a path behind the orangery, this time choosing a route with trusted attendants. Yet Lady Marceline was never far. She appeared as if summoned by rumor. "My dear Cecily," the widow said sweetly from the shadows, "you take such careful steps. It makes one wonder what you fear." Cecily's voice remained soft. "I fear nothing," she replied. Lady Marceline laughed lightly. "Then you will not mind my company?" Before Cecily could answer, a sudden commotion erupted near the far end of the garden. A window latch had been left open, and a gust rattled panes like bones in a cupboard. A servant hurried, someone called for a ladder, and in the confusion, Cecily moved too quickly toward a mislaid lantern. A foot slipped. The Duke of Haverleigh caught her, too late to call it an accident, too close to pretend innocence. Her hand pressed to his coat, his arm tightened around her waist. Their faces were near enough that any observer would call it a kiss, even if they had not kissed. Lady Marceline's eyes gleamed. "Perfect," the widow murmured, as if pleased by the mechanics of scandal. Cecily recognized the trap instantly. The Duke did too, but his reaction was slow, not because he was confused, but because he was furious at the need for control. His impatience surfaced again. He pulled Cecily back with a firmness that bordered on harshness. Cecily did not protest. She did not accuse. She only stepped away, regained her balance, and raised her gaze to Lady Marceline with a cool calm. "If you wished for a lesson in proximity," Cecily said quietly, "you need only have asked. You need not stage it." Lady Marceline's smile turned brittle. "Staging?" she asked. "My dear, I simply arrived to see whether you required assistance." Cecily's restraint became a silent blade. "Then you arrived too late," she replied. "The Duke already offered it." The Duke's eyes widened at the phrase, "already offered it," because it framed his action as duty rather than desire, precisely what society required. Lady Marceline's expression cooled. "Duty," she echoed. Cecily nodded once. "Duty," she confirmed. Lady Marceline tried to recover her advantage by shifting the topic toward propriety and marriage. "If the Duke is so determined," she said, "perhaps the proposal should be made again, more formally." Cecily felt the aching tug of the moment. She had proposed a solution at the Glasshouse. Now society demanded confirmation. The Duke of Haverleigh, sensing the trap closing, looked at Cecily. His gaze asked a question without words. "Would you allow yourself to be used again?" Cecily answered with silence. Then she curtsied, one smooth motion, modest and public. "Mr. Harrowdean," she said. Lady Marceline blinked at the incorrect phrasing. The name, Cecily's own designation, had been used before by those who wanted to reduce her to family management. Cecily lifted her chin. "My family's affairs are not a rumor," she continued. "They will be settled in the open, with proper witnesses." She turned then toward the Duke. "And if you intend to marry me," she added softly, "you must do it in a manner that admits the truth." The Duke's jaw tightened. For a moment it looked as though he would refuse, not because he did not want her, but because he did not want to be forced into emotional honesty. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. "My lady," he said to Lady Marceline with restrained fury, "you will not rewrite this." He turned toward Cecily, and his voice softened, though his pride still fought to remain hard. "Cecily," he said. She did not flinch at hearing her name spoken by him. It sounded different when it came from a man who could not afford to be reckless. He continued, You proposed a solution because you understood the rules. I accepted because I feared losing what was right." Cecily's breath caught, small and controlled. He glanced once toward the attendants, then back to her. "I am not asking for your forgiveness," he said. "I am asking you to take my name with your eyes open." His proposal was not the flourish society expected. It was plain, and it contained the truth he had tried to avoid. Cecily's eyes shone, but she did not weep. Her restraint held. She extended her hand. "I will take it," she replied, "if you take the responsibility you keep trying to outsource to pride." His expression shifted, pain, then devotion. "Then I will," he said. Lady Marceline watched with a face that struggled to remain polite. She could not stop the narrative now. Society needed a conclusion, and Cecily had offered one. The whispers turned, as whispers often do, when a story refuses to behave. Instead of Cecily being compromised, she became dangerously resolute. Instead of the Duke being reckless, he became impossibly devoted. Women who had once smirked began to watch Cecily with admiration. Men, too, found themselves reassessing their assumptions about clever ladies. The final test came in the form of public commitment at a small wedding in the chapel near the Duke's London residence. Society attended not because it believed in romance, but because it believed in spectacle. Yet the chapel, with its quiet stone and filtered light, made romance feel almost holy. Cecily arrived with her veil arranged carefully. She had chosen the lace herself. She had decided what kind of bride she would be. When she stood before the altar, her posture remained composed, but her eyes carried an ache. The Duke of Haverleigh watched her, his face controlled, his scar visible as if marking a line between who he had been and who he was becoming. He said the vows with a clarity that sounded like a man making a promise he intended to keep, even if it unmade his pride. After the ceremony, society spilled into the street with calling cards and gossip. People asked whether it had been love, whether it had been duty, whether it had been scandal that had turned into virtue. Cecily did not answer. Instead, she accepted the Duke's arm with a gentle firmness. She led him away from the crowd and into a private carriage where propriety could settle back into place. As the carriage moved through London streets bright with early spring, Cecily turned to him. "You have a flaw," she said quietly. He looked at her, unsettled by the intimacy of correction. "And you?" he asked. Cecily's lips curved slightly. "I have discipline," she replied. "It is not the same." The Duke's expression softened. "Then teach me," he said. Cecily's silence became her answer again, but this time it was softer, less a shield, more a welcome. He reached for her hand and, in a gesture careful enough to respect propriety even in privacy, interlaced his fingers with hers. Outside, London continued its chatter. Inside, Cecily felt the slow ache of belonging to someone who had finally learned to listen. They would face trustees and entailed clauses, they would endure the ton's hungry eyes, and they would be tempted to hide behind rules. But now, at last, Cecily had her choice, and the Duke of Haverleigh had his reckoning. And when the carriage turned toward their future, toward a life built not on whispers but on decisions that could be proven, Cecily knew the story would not devour her again.